Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text.
Usually, when you study anatomy or physiology, location is pretty much everything.
Right, yeah.
Like, if you want to fix a problem in the heart, you target the heart. Or if you need to dilate a blood vessel in a patient's leg, you send a drug straight to that specific blood vessel.
You treat the problem exactly where it lives. I mean, that's the fundamental logic of almost every intervention you learn early on.
Exactly. It's direct, it's intuitive, and it makes geographic sense.
Right.
But then you step into the world of neuropharmacology, and suddenly that map is it's completely upside down. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're acting as your last-minute lecture team to conquer Chapter 22 of Lane's Pharmacology. We're looking at indirect-acting antiadrenergic agents.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
It really is. But our mission today is to translate this really dense drug information into clear, student-friendly language. We want to focus on clinical reasoning and safe medication administration so you can actually apply this in your nursing practice.
Yeah, because we don't want you to just memorize a list of side effects. We want to connect the what's with the whys. When you actually understand the pharmacology, the nursing implications become intuitive.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this central paradox. We're talking about drugs that lower blood pressure, right?
Right.
But they never actually touch a blood vessel. So if my patient has high blood pressure out in their systemic circulation, why on earth are we turning to drugs that operate entirely inside the central nervous system?
Well, it really comes down to where the commands are originating. I mean, the brainstem is the command center, right? It's sending out impulses along sympathetic neurons.
And those impulses travel out to the body and hit alpha and beta receptors.
Exactly. And when those receptors activate, they constrict blood vessels and increase heart rate. So these indirect-acting drugs, they operate strictly inside the brainstem to basically turn down the volume of those outgoing commands.
Oh, I see. So even though the drug is acting deep inside the brain, the net result out in the body is just decreased activation of those peripheral receptors.
You got it. They're indirectly accomplishing the exact same job as a direct-acting blocker would out in the periphery.
Okay, I follow that conceptually. But looking at figure 22.1 in the chapter, the actual mechanism, I'm genuinely confused by the terminology here.
How so?
Well, these drugs are classified as centrally acting alpha-2 agonists.
Right.
But an agonist is something that stimulates a receptor. How does an agonist, something that, hits the gas pedal, act as an antiadrenergic agent? Shouldn't stimulating a sympathetic pathway raise blood pressure?
Yeah, it sounds like a total contradiction. But it makes sense when you look at the microscopic anatomy of where these specific alpha-2 receptors are located.
Okay.
In the CNS, these alpha-2 receptors sit on the presynaptic nerve terminals. That prefix, presynapt, is the whole secret to this entire class of drugs.
Presynaptic. Okay, let me try to visualize this with an analogy. Is it kind of like a factory supervisor?
Let's hear it.
So if the presynaptic nerve terminal is a factory and its only job is to pump out a product, in this case the neurotransmitter norepinephrine, into the synaptic gap.
Right, the warehouse.
Yeah. And the alpha-2 receptor is the supervisor standing right at the end of the assembly line. When enough norepinephrine piles up in the gap, it physically bumps into the supervisor.
Yeah.
And that contact signals the supervisor like, hey, the warehouse is full, we have enough product, and the supervisor hits the big red button to shut down the assembly line. Is it like that?
That is actually a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The factory concept really works. But we should refine what that supervisor is doing. It's actively inhibiting. This is a classic negative feedback loop.
So it's a built-in braking system.
Exactly. The body uses those alpha-2 receptors to keep itself in check. So by giving the patient an alpha-2 agonist, the drug binds to that supervisor receptor and tricks the neuron into thinking there's an absolute flood of norepinephrine in the synapse.
Ah, wow. So the neuron gets a false signal that it's overproducing, and it drastically cuts back on releasing the actual norepinephrine.
Precisely. And because there's suddenly far less norepinephrine traveling across the synaptic cleft to hit the postsynaptic receptors, the firing of the sympathetic neurons it drops off a cliff.
Which leads to vasodilation and decreased blood pressure.
Exactly.
So the agonist is essentially pressing the brake pedal by pretending to be the body's own negative feedback signal.
That
makes so much sense. So now that we have the mechanics down, let's look at the poster child for this class, Clonidine.
Yes, Clonidine is our prototype, and clinically you'll see it used for 3 very different approved applications.
Right, under different brand names. For hypertension, which is our main focus, it's Catapris, or the extended-release Nexiclon XR.
Right, and it's also used for severe epidural pain under the name Duraclon, and even for managing ADHD as Capve.
But mechanically, they're all doing exactly what we just described, right?
Yes, exactly the same central mechanism.
Okay, so focusing strictly on hypertension. When Clonidine hits those brainstem alpha-2 receptors, what does that actually look like for the patient's vital signs?
Well, you'll see 3 major peripheral effects. First, bradycardia, because you're withdrawing sympathetic tone to the heart.
Makes sense.
Second, a decrease in cardiac output, which just naturally follows the bradycardia. And third, widespread vasodilation.
And the combination of those 3 is what really drops the blood pressure.
Right. And what's fascinating here is a little clinical quirk. Because this hypotensive effect isn't heavily dependent on the patient's posture. Orthostatic hypotension, getting dizzy when standing up, is actually minimal with Clonidine compared to other blood pressure meds.
Oh, that's a nice benefit. But wait, if this drug has to get all the way into the brainstem, it must have a highly efficient way to cross the blood-brain barrier.
It does. And that comes down to table 22.1, it's pharmacokinetics. Clonidine is highly lipid-soluble.
Oh, right, because the blood-brain barrier is basically a dense layer of lipid cell membranes.
Exactly. So a lipid-soluble drug like Clonidine just slips right through it. It absorbs really quickly after oral dosing and begins lowering blood pressure in just 30 to 60 minutes.
30 to 60 minutes. But bathing the entire central nervous system in a drug that dampens sympathetic tone, that has to cause some collateral damage, the brainstem controls a lot more than just blood vessels.
Yeah, that high lipid solubility is a double-edged sword.
Yep.
It's why the drug works so efficiently, but it's also exactly why the adverse effects are so profound.
What else is getting suppressed?
Well, you're dampening general arousal pathways. Because of this, 35% of patients experience significant drowsiness, and another 8% experience outright clinical sedation.
Wait, 35%? That's a massive safety risk for a patient just trying to live a normal life.
It is.
So if I'm a nurse sending a patient home with a new Clonidine prescription, I can't just say, hey, your blood pressure will be better. I have to explicitly warn them about the sedation.
Absolutely. Patient teaching has to emphasize avoiding hazardous activities, especially driving or operating machinery during those early weeks.
Do the effects wear off eventually?
Yeah, the reassuring part is that these CNS responses do become less intense over time as the body acclimates.
Okay, good. Now, there's another side effect that feels like a big quality of life issue: xerostomia, or severe dry mouth. It says here it hits about 40% of patients.
Yes, very common.
But why? If we're targeting blood pressure, why are the salivary glands suddenly shutting down?
It goes back to the interconnectedness of the autonomic nervous system. Activating those alpha-2 receptors doesn't just reduce sympathetic outflow, it alters parasympathetic outflow too.
Oh, and salivary glands are regulated by the autonomic system.
Right. When that central control center gets suppressed, the secretory signals to the salivary glands just diminish.
So the patient feels exhausted and their mouth is as dry as cotton. I mean, thinking about compliance, that's annoying enough to make someone quit taking their daily pill.
Which is why nursing care goes way beyond just noting the side effect in a chart.
Yeah.
You have to offer practical solutions. Teach them to continuously chew gum, suck on hard, sugarless candy, and just carry fluids everywhere. You have to help them manage the discomfort so they remain compliant.
Because if they just get fed up and throw the bottle away, we run into a really severe reaction, right? Rebound hypertension.
Yes, potentially life-threatening.
Explain the physiology there. If I take the brake off by stopping the drug, shouldn't their blood pressure just return to their normal baseline? Why does it spike dangerously high?
It's physiological overcompensation. When you chronically suppress norepinephrine release, the body tries to adapt. It might upregulate the number of receptors, or the neurons might build up massive stores of norepinephrine that they haven't been allowed to release.
Oh, no. So if you abruptly stop the Clonidine,
that artificial brake is instantly removed. The neurons suddenly dump all that stored norepinephrine into the synapse, hitting receptors that are now highly sensitive.
So their sympathetic nervous system goes into absolute overdrive. They get a massive spike in blood pressure, tachycardia, sweating.
Exactly. It's an autonomic storm. It can last for a week or more if left untreated, and it can even cause a stroke.
Wow. So the critical nursing implication is strict patient education. Clonidine must never be stopped cold turkey.
Never. It has to be meticulously tapered down over 2 to 4 days.
Let's talk about abuse potential, too. People abuse blood pressure medicine.
Sometimes, yes. People taking opioids or cocaine will sometimes take high doses of Clonidine because it can enhance the euphoric or sedative effects.
That is wild. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Let's look at the lifespan care table. For older adults, we use the Beers criteria to flag drugs with high risks.
Right.
And Clonidine is designated as potentially inappropriate for patients 65 and older. I'm assuming that's because of the fall risks from the sedation and bradycardia.
That is exactly the reasoning. Older adults are just significantly more sensitive to the CNS effects and the hypotension. The risk profile for falls and confusion is simply too high.
And for pregnancy, it's also a no-go. It's embryotoxic in animals, so we have to rule out pregnancy before starting it. Plus, it concentrates in breast milk.
Right, so we have this incredibly effective drug, but it carries heavy baggage, which brings us to the sibling drugs in this class.
Right, let's move chronologically to guanfacine and Methyldopa. Guanfacine used for hypertension and ADHD seems very similar to Clonidine.
It is. Same profile of sedation, dry mouth, and rebound hypertension risks. But there's a crucial pharmacokinetic detail in Table 22.1. Guanfacine is metabolized by the CYP3A4 enzyme.
Oh, okay. That CYP3A4 pathway immediately waves a red flag for a dietary interaction.
Yes.
Grapefruit juice. Patients must completely avoid grapefruit juice because it inhibits that enzyme, which could lead to toxic levels of the drug building up.
Perfect. And to manage daytime sedation, if they're taking immediate release tablets, they should take them right at bedtime to sleep through the worst of it.
That's super practical. Now, the other drug, Methyldopa, this one is really different. It operates by the same ultimate mechanism, but it's a prodrug.
Exactly. Methyldopa itself is totally inactive when you swallow it.
So it's kind of like a Trojan horse. It enters the brainstem neuron quietly in a totally inert state.
I love that analogy. Yes, and once it's inside the presynaptic neuron, the local enzymes convert it into a compound called methylnorepinephrine.
And that newly minted compound is what actually stimulates the alpha-2 supervisor receptor.
Right. And clinically, it differs from Clonidine in a very specific way. At usual therapeutic doses, Methyldopa only causes vasodilation.
Wait, really? So it drops blood pressure but doesn't decrease the heart rate or cardiac output?
Correct. And beyond that, it has a highly specific niche. Methyldopa is actually safe for pregnancy.
Oh, unlike Clonidine.
Right. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists actually designates Methyldopa as a preferred drug for managing hypertension during pregnancy.
But wait, even though it's safe for the fetus, it carries two unique severe dangers for the mother, right? First is a positive Coombs test and hemolytic anemia.
Yes, and this raises an important question for nurses. How do you balance that risk?
Whoa, what does a positive Coombs test actually mean here?
It means the drug alters the immune system just enough that the body starts producing autoantibodies.
Yeah.
They mistakenly target the patient's own red blood cells.
So the body is painting a target on its own red blood cells. Does that mean the cells are actively being destroyed?
Not necessarily. In 10 to 20% of cases, patients develop a positive test after 6 to 12 months, but no actual cell destruction.
Okay, that's a relief.
But in about 5% of patients, the macrophages in the spleen see those targets and begin actively lacing the red blood cells.
Which is hemolytic anemia. That is incredibly dangerous, so we need baseline lab monitoring.
Absolutely. Before the first dose, the nurse must ensure there's a baseline Coombs test, hematocrit, hemoglobin, and RBC count.
And periodic checks after that. If they develop actual hemolytic anemia, we stop the drug immediately, right?
Immediately.
The second major danger is hepatotoxicity, hepatitis, jaundice, even fatal hepatic necrosis.
Right. So again, you need baseline liver function tests, specifically AST and ALT, and periodic checks.
Yeah.
You're also assessing for physical signs like yellowing of the skin or sclera.
Dark urine, right? Upper quadrant pain.
Exactly. If any of those appear, the drug is stopped immediately.
It really paints a vivid picture of the nurse's role. You're walking this tightrope, balancing a drug that protects a pregnancy against profound risks to the mother's own blood and liver.
Which brings us perfectly to the summary of major nursing implications.
Right. So what does this all mean? Let's pull this into a concrete clinical action plan.
Assessment is first. Baseline BP, HR, and cardiovascular history.
And if it's for ADHD or pain, establish baselines there too. What about administration? Table 22.2 says oral forms can be taken with or without food.
Right, but pay attention to the extended release forms like Nexiclon XR.
Right. If my patient has dysphagia, can I just crush the tablet into applesauce?
Absolutely never. Crushing it destroys the time-release matrix. You dump a massive, highly concentrated dose into their system all at once, causing severe hypertension.
Okay, good to know. What about the transdermal patches for Clonidine?
They're great for compliance. Applied once a week to hairless, intact skin on the upper arm or torso.
But they have to rotate the site weekly to prevent contact dermatitis, right?
Exactly. And finally, evaluation. Trend the BP and HR, and watch for signs of drug abuse, like frequent prescription requests.
So the primary takeaway is that these drugs are highly effective, but require really active nursing management and patient education.
Definitely. And I'd like to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Please do.
Consider the profound interconnectedness of the human body. We have a drug like Clonidine, designed to target completely automatic blood pressure controls buried in the brainstem. But in doing so, it inadvertently bleeds over into subjective consciousness.
Wow, yeah.
It creates subjective euphoria that makes it a target for opioid abuse. It highlights how tightly woven our survival mechanisms like blood pressure and our reward pathways truly are. You can't touch one without sending ripples into the other.
That is such a wild connection to think about, and it's exactly why we need to understand the pharmacology, not just memorize it. Thank you so much for studying with us today. On behalf of the Last Minute Lecture team here at The Deep Dive, keep synthesizing, and we'll see you next time.